the summer of 2025, Central Texas turned from holiday paradise to killing ground in a single afternoon. Over 850 people were pulled from the jaws of death in one of the most massive rescue operations in state history. Yet dozens still lost their lives when the Guadalupe River unleashed its fury. But how did a routine Independence Day weekend become one of America's deadliest flash floods? What warnings went unheard, and who fought their way back from the brink when everything they knew was swept away? This is the story of survival against impossible odds. A story that began with laughter under clear blue skies and ended in a nightmare no one saw coming. It started like any other family getaway. The Rivera family from San Antonio had driven up to the Texas Hill Country for a long 4th of July weekend, drawn by the gentle river and the promise of fireworks over the water. The river looked so peaceful that morning, its waters sparkling under the July sun. No one imagined it could turn deadly overnight. Laughter filled the air, neighbors swapped stories, kids played without a care, and the Rivera soaked up the simple joy of being together away from the city. For the Riveras, this was the kind of escape they needed. Roberto worked long hours as a mechanic, Elena taught middle school, and the kids had been counting down the days to this trip. Bedtime stories and whispered goodnights. Everything felt right. The forecast mentioned a chance of rain, but nothing out of the ordinary for Texas in July. July 4th dawned perfect. Blue skies, excited kids, and the river still flowing gentle and inviting. No one paid much attention to those distant clouds. The morning passed in a blur of games and anticipation. The Riveras had no idea that just upstream, heavy rains from the night before were already feeding the Guadalupe. Over sandwiches and cold drinks, they talked about tubing later that afternoon. The water looked a little higher, but the kids begged to go anyway. Roberto checked his phone once. Nothing alarming. The river called to them. What could go wrong on a day like this? The hill country had seen summer storms before, and the family trusted the familiar flow. They pushed off around 3 o'clock. The current carried them gently downstream at first, laughter echoing off the banks as fireworks stands prepared for evening shows. For 20 blissful minutes, it was pure summer magic. The Guadalupe carried them like an old friend, the banks lush and familiar. Then, almost imperceptibly, the river began to change. A distant roar carried on the wind, something the Riveras would later wish they had heeded sooner. Upstream, rain was falling in sheets. The Guadalupe, fed by countless creeks in the hill country, was waking up angry. The first fat raindrops hit. The kids thought it was part of the fun. Elena suggested turning back, but the current had other ideas. Within minutes, the gentle float turned urgent. The water rose faster than anyone expected, carrying the family deeper into the narrowing channel. Panic hadn't set in yet. They were still laughing nervously, telling each other it was just a summer storm, but the river was already claiming its first victims upstream. The roar grew louder. Elena's heart pounded as she realized this was no ordinary rain. The Guadalupe was becoming something else entirely. They scrambled for higher ground, the kids' laughter gone now. Roberto kept his voice steady, but his eyes betrayed the fear building inside. Every second stretched into eternity. They could hear distant screams carried on the wind. Other families caught in the same nightmare. Help was coming. But would it reach them in time? The Guadalupe had already swallowed cars and campsites upstream. Trapped and terrified, the Riveras had no choice but to wait. Their ordinary holiday had become a fight for life. And they were only one family among hundreds caught in the flood's deadly grip. With the river rising by the minute, the Riveras could only hold on and pray. Upstream, the flood had already claimed its first lives, but downstream, rescue teams were mobilizing in a race against time. What began as scattered showers had exploded into a catastrophic flash flood. More than 800 people would eventually need rescue, but for now, every second counted for families like the Riveras. Elena's mind raced through every parenting decision that had led them here. Roberto kept his voice calm for the children, but inside, the mechanic who fixed engines every day now faced a force no tool could repair. Help was tantalizingly close, yet the river fought back with every inch. The rescuers had already pulled dozens from trees and rooftops, but the water was still rising. "Over here," Elena shouted, her voice raw. For the first time since the water rose, real hope flickered in their chests, even as the river pulled harder at their legs. The first rope missed. Roberto's heart sank, but he refused to give up. The family had come this far together, they would not be separated now. This time the rope held. Roberto became the anchor for his family, his mechanic's hands gripping with the same strength he used on stubborn engines every day. In that split second, Elena's motherly instinct took over. She would not lose her child to this river, no matter what it cost her. One by one, the Riveras were lifted to safety. The children first, always the children first. Elena felt her legs give way the moment her feet left the rock. Roberto made it last, as any father would. The moment he reached his wife and children, the weight of the ordeal finally hit him. They were alive, but the nightmare was far from over for hundreds of others. Wrapped in blankets and surrounded by rescuers, the Riveras began to process what had just happened. The river that had carried them so gently earlier now felt like a monster they had barely escaped. Across Kerr County and beyond, similar stories were unfolding. More than 850 rescues would be recorded before the night ended, one of the largest single-day flood rescue operations in Texas history. Hours later, the Riveras reached dry land and a makeshift shelter. Their cabin, their belongings, even their car. Everything was gone, swept away by the flood. Elena kept replaying the moment Diego almost slipped. Roberto wondered how close they had come to never seeing their children grow up. The shelter buzzed with other survivors sharing their own harrowing tales. Small kindnesses from strangers began to heal what the river had broken. The Riveras had lost almost everything material, but they still had each other. Dawn revealed the true extent of the destruction. Roads washed out, homes destroyed, and the Guadalupe River slowly returning to its banks, but leaving behind a trail of loss. Returning to the campground was heartbreaking. Their vacation home for those few days had been completely swept away. Only a few scattered belongings remained caught in the trees. Among the debris, Roberto found one small miracle, a photograph that had somehow survived. It became a symbol that they would rebuild, just as Texas always does after disaster. The community response was overwhelming. Texans from across the state drove in with trucks full of supplies, proving once again that in crisis, neighbors become family. That night, as the children finally slept, Elena and Roberto talked quietly about the future. They had survived the impossible. Now they would face the long road of recovery together. In the weeks that followed, the full story emerged. Dozens had perished, but the heroic rescues, more than 850 documented, showed the best of human courage and coordination. Elena later reflected that the flood taught her what truly matters. "We lost everything that weekend," she said, "but we gained a deeper appreciation for every single day we have together." Roberto still checks weather apps obsessively, but he also says the experience made him a better father, quicker to hug his children and slower to take ordinary moments for granted. For Mia, the flood became a story she tells her friends to remind them how quickly life can change and how strong her family proved to be. Diego still has occasional nightmares about the river, but he also remembers the helicopter lights and the strong hands that pulled him to safety. He calls the rescuers his superheroes. The Guadalupe River flows peacefully again today. But every resident of the Texas Hill Country now carries the memory of July 4th, 2025, when nature reminded everyone of its awesome power. The heroes of that day were the men and women who risked their own lives in the raging waters. Their courage turned a potential tragedy into a story of survival for hundreds of families. The Riveras returned to the river, not out of recklessness, but to honor what they survived and to teach their children that even after the worst storms, life and hope can return. This is the story of one family's brush with death and the extraordinary rescue effort that saved so many. In the end, it reminds us all how fragile life can be and how unbreakable the human spirit becomes when we face the storm together,